For a few months, I worked a night shift at a 24-hour gas station in northern West Virginia. It was a Wednesday night. It started like any other normal shift at work, any day of the week. A few people stopped in here and there, mainly buying lottery tickets and paying for gas. Forward it a few hours, it was 3 a.m, and the traffic had died down a little bit. I was sitting up front when I watched a maroon Lincoln sedan pull into the parking lot and park in the back behind all the gas pumps. It was a couple of minutes later when a woman emerged from the front passenger seat who sort of stumbled out of the car and started approaching the gas station. I watched her as she walked in at a rather brisk pace, in a very nervous kind of fashion. I instantly noticed that her face was pale and she had sweat perspiring on her forehead. Mind you, it was the dead of winter and I'm pretty sure that the temperature was below 0 degrees that night. She walked past the counter and headed straight towards the back to the bathrooms. She came out about 5 minutes later and her body language was really starting to concern me. She was kind of pacing back and forth in the aisles, occasionally peeking her head around and looking out the windows towards the car. Right as I thought about saying something, she walked right out of the door and headed in the direction towards the car that was parked across the lot. About 5 minutes went by and the car didn't move. But then suddenly the car went into reverse and did a 180 towards the gas pumps and parked beside one. The car was much closer now, so I was able to see the woman inside, who was accompanied by a man in the front seat. Another minute went by, then the passenger door sprung open, and the woman who previously came in began walking towards the building again. This time, when she walked by, it was becoming more and more obvious to me that something was wrong. She walked towards the counter, holding a $20 bill, and said, "20 on pump 5, in a quiet, shaky voice. I took it and continued to watch her body language, seeing that her hands were clenched in a fist, in addition to the sweat on her forehead. I looked at her with concern, and I think she noticed it on my face, not trying to make it obvious in case the man outside was watching me. I said to her, "Is everything all right?" And she looked up at me, not saying a word for at least 5 seconds, until she replied, "Yes, thank you." I didn't buy it, and continued to question her, saying, "Do you know who that guy is in the car?" And she responded with, yeah, that's my boyfriend." I didn't believe any of this to be true, and I watched as she approached the car, right as she opened the passenger's door. The man handed her something, and she grabbed it and promptly turned backwards towards the building. She walked in and instantly went to the chip aisle, where she paced around again and eventually bought a bag of chips to the counter. I was finally able to make out what the man had handed her. It was a $5 bill. I looked at her again with concern, but didn't want to continue badgering her, also acknowledging the possibility of her temperament being from an argument or something. She slapped it down on the counter, then did something I never would have expected. She leaned in and reached towards the lighters, which are close to the back of the counter by me, and faintly muttered under her breath, "I need help." Those words raised the hairs on the back of my neck and confirmed my suspicions. I casually replied, acting like I was ringing her out, and said, "Do you want me to call the police?" And she nodded her head. I pressed the panic button that was located under the counter, which alerted 911 of an emergency. Right after doing so, I looked up and I noticed that the girl was heading towards the exit. I ran around the counter and went straight for the door, just as she was about to walk out. I told her to stop and lock the door before she could leave. She instantly started crying and was clearly in shock from the whole situation. She kept repeating these words that still give me chills just thinking about it to this day. "He's gonna get mad, he's gonna get mad." I told her to follow me, and I took her to the back room where I deadbolted the lock shut, locking us both inside. I assured her that the police were on their way and everything was going to be okay. I had no choice but to remain calm in the situation because if I didn't, I knew she would freak out even more. However, the sheer feeling of panic continued to grow when the man suddenly started pounding on the outside door of the gas station, screaming the girl's name. This occurrence was enough to send her into total shock, and she just sat down and became completely emotionless and silent. The pounding lasted for another few minutes until it finally grew quiet. I didn't know if the man had broken through or what, but I wasn't going to go out there and find out. A couple of minutes after that, the police arrived, kicked the back door down, and eventually we came out. I was instantly separated from the girl who got picked up in an ambulance. I was taken to the police station to give a statement where I explained everything that happened. After that, I was sent home for the rest of the night, and I didn't hear anything until a couple of weeks later. I found out online that the woman was being trafficked that night. She had been kidnapped about 45 minutes away in a Walmart parking lot. The article gave a description and a sketch of the suspect, which looked a lot like the guy I saw the night in the car. Apparently, the driver was heading south to wherever he was planning on taking her. The woman was able to convince the man to pull over so she could use the restroom. While he was there, he sent the girl back in to pay for the gas. The girl must have convinced him to let her get a snack, which explains why she came in the third time after she realised I could possibly help her. I've neither heard or spoken to this girl since that day. I don't consider myself to be a hero by any means, but I'm so glad that I was in the right place at the right time. I'm still a little shook from that night, even to this day, but I just hope that the victim of this horrific crime is doing okay. I had to drive back from a 16-hour drive, which I planned on taking all in one go. I'm a female and I always considered myself to be very independent. Before departing, I stopped at a gas station to fill up on gas and get a snack. At a very busy cluster of gas stations in the middle of nowhere. It was a few hours shy of Sacramento. I parked off to the side after gassing up so I could stretch my legs and use the bathroom and replenish my road snacks in Red Bull in preparation for the road trip. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary and I got back on the road. When I was about an hour in, I got a tyre pressure warning light signal on my dashboard. Normally, I'd stop on the side of the road to assess the situation, but something in my gut told me not to. It was a very empty stretch of highway with curves and a very soft shoulder. The vehicle seemed to be handling it fine. Also, it was a rental, and I paid for extended insurance, so I wasn't too worried about it. I eventually hopped out of the left lane and noticed a sign for a town that was 9 miles up the road. I decided to take a chance and made my way to a small valero next to what looked like an abandoned diner. I pulled in with hopes of finding an air pump in case there was a slow tyre leak. I didn't see one, so I parked and got out of the vehicle. I immediately heard a hissing sound and watched the tyre slowly sink until the rim touched the ground. It was definitely inconvenient, but I figured a rental SUV would have a full-size spare, so I checked the trunk and found a donut tyre. I got on the phone with Enterprise and they said that they could send someone to put the spare tyre on in about an hour. I was annoyed, so I said no thanks, I'll just do it myself in 10 minutes. They also gave me the option to swap the car out in Sacramento the following day. It was Sunday, so all the car shops near me were closed. I decided that I would put the tyre on myself, then possibly swap it out the next day. Once I started working on the tyre, I had to wave off a very nice Good Samaritans, but one car in particular, with about 3 males, were being extra pushy about helping. Rona luckily gave me an added excuse in requesting that they keep their distance and go about their way. I spoke loudly and firm enough in my assistance that I caught the attention of a few other people in the vicinity, standing over at the gas pumps. Eventually they gave up and drove off, swapped out the donut, started driving, contemplating my next move. It was December, and I was not about to brave the Shasta Mountain Pass on a donut, nor try and drive on that rubber thing the rest of the 10 hours home. But I really needed to get home. I searched tyre shops, but everyone I found was closed because it was Sunday. Then it dawned on me to search Walmart. I know I could be cutting it close, but I thought that if I could just make it to Sacramento in time, I could get a cheap full-size tyre at the auto centre before they close so I can make it home that night. I pulled in with about 20 minutes to spare and explained my situation to the very kind grandfatherly man working there. I let him know that I wanted to keep the flat tyre to return to the rental company, just in case. As I was waiting in the dingy Walmart auto centre lobby, the old man walked in with a very serious look on his face, holding a pair of pliers in his hand. Clasped between the metal pliers was a box blade. He asked me if I'd gotten into any altercations or made someone angry. Completely puzzled, I said no. I'm not from around here, and I was just passing through. He said that it was almost impossible for the blade to have been lodged in my tyre in the fashion in which it was. He asked if I had noticed anyone following, with an infliction of concern in his voice that made my blood run cold. And to be honest, I'd been so preoccupied with figuring out my next move, I wouldn't have noticed if someone had been following me. My mind immediately went back to the old overly pushy men at the gas station. As I thought about it more intently, they didn't actually stop at the gas station, they just pulled in next to my car and then left. I stuttered and, I don't know, to the old man. And he told me to take it for a drive around the building and into the neighbourhood and watch my rearview mirror. He instructed me to pull back into the mechanic bay and honk. explaining that they'll come out. He told me that this was an all too common ploy used on that stretch of highway. He explained how these people will insert the blade just enough to get people to break down on the deserted stretches in between the small towns. I thanked him profusely and got back into my rental to test the waters. Luckily, after a few erratic lefts and rights, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, so I looped back onto the highway and pressed on into the night. The dark, desolate highway loomed in a more threatening manner as every nerve in my body was on high alert. It wasn't until I was on the road for 15 minutes when I saw the same car from earlier. I started to freak out, but I kept looking back and kept on driving, but kept looking back occasionally. They ended up following me for 2 whole hours until they eventually got off on an exit. I've never been targeted before and I'm pretty generally aware of my surroundings. I still don't know what these people are up to, but it was definitely no good. This experience definitely rattled my false sense of immortality. To all those driving along the I-5 stretch past Bakersfield alone, be mindful of where you stop in emergencies. I try not to think about what could have happened if my independent ego had overridden my gut instinct and I stopped on the shoulder instead. I've been a semi-truck driver for 9 years, and during that time, I've seen some crazy things that most people wouldn't believe. But you know what they say, nothing can prepare you for the future. I found out that the hard way. On a cold December evening, I had been driving all day from Seattle, Washington to Boise, Idaho. This was one of my regular routes, and it felt like the miles just flew by, but by the end of my shift, I felt really exhausted, and I decided to pull over into a rest stop near Snake River Canyon, just off the I-84 freeway. I never took any chances with rest stops, so I parked my rig at the far end of the parking lot, making sure there were plenty of other vehicles between mine and any potential hazards. I put on the parking brakes, grabbed my flashlight and hopped out of the cab to make my way towards the rest stop bathrooms. As I was walking, I noticed a woman standing in the shadows on the edge of the parking lot. She looked dishevelled and frantic, and it was clear that something was going on. I just assumed that she was homeless and looking for shelter for the night. But as I got closer, she rushed towards me. "Please," she pleaded. "I need your help. My husband's just called in and he's been having chest pains. I need to get to the hospital." The look of fear in her eyes was enough to make my blood run cold. I hesitated, but I could tell that the woman was desperate and I just couldn't abandon her and leave her stranded. I reluctantly agreed, and we climbed into the cab of my truck. I asked her a few questions to get some information about her husband and his condition. She said her name was Claire, and her husband's name was Eric. She added that he was also having trouble breathing and was complaining of dizziness. He told her it was getting worse by the minute, so we had to get there quickly. We drove in silence as my mind was spinning. I navigated the winding roads and made my way towards the hospital. I had a million questions running through my head, but now wasn't the time to ask them. Finally, when we reached the hospital, I pulled up to the emergency room drop-off zone. Before I could say anything, she was already out the door, sprinting towards the entrance. I put the truck in park and got out to follow her. My heart was pounding so hard. When I reached the entrance, she was nowhere to be seen. I frantically searched the lobby in the hallway, but there was no sign of her. I asked the lady at the reception desk if she saw where she went, and she led me to the room. When we got to the hallway, I spotted Claire, slouched on the ground against the wall. Eric was dead. After a few moments of silence, I finally mustered the courage to ask Claire what had happened, but she was too grief-stricken to answer. I offered to drive her back to the rest stop, but all she mumbled was, "No, I want to go home with Eric." I was heartbroken to hear that, and ended up convincing Claire to let me drive her back to the rest stop, despite her utter shock. We were almost finally there, and I worked up the courage to ask her more about what had happened before I showed up. Everything she said sounded absolutely devastating, until she broke down and confessed something horrible to me in tears. She said that we had a terrible argument earlier, and I slipped something into his drink. My mouth dropped open in shock, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We drove the rest of the way in silence, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. When we finally arrived at the rest stop, Claire got out and slowly walked away. I watched her. She disappeared back into the rest stop. After collecting myself and taking a few deep breaths, I called the police. I guess I learned a pretty tough lesson that night. No matter how much experience you have in life, you'll never know what the future can hold. I go to a private Catholic university in the downtown of one of the most dangerous cities in America. At least that's what it says on most articles I've read. Next to my dorm is a little gas station that sells snacks and stuff, and I go there pretty often because they sell Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and literally everyone needs that in their lives if they don't already have it. It was around 1 p.m, and I was headed to my next class. I thought I would stop there and pick up a snack before class. I was waiting in line, holding my yogurt, And all of a sudden, this huge guy, probably 6'5", 250 pounds, mid-20s, taps me gently on the shoulder and tells me that my hair is beautiful. I'm somewhat used to this kind of encounter because I have really long, naturally strawberry blonde hair. I smiled warmly and turned back around. Nothing about this man scared me at first. Out of nowhere, I feel a huge hand slide up the back of my neck and grab a fistful of my hair. The guy groaned and yanked back. I'm by no means strong or able to defend myself against this monster of a man. I'm 5'2" and about 140 pounds. I screamed and whipped out my pepper spray that was on my keychain. Luckily, the guy behind the counter dove over the desk and slammed him off of me. I was in the most weirdest state of shock at that point. The guy who pulled him off me was super kind and made sure that he had left before I went outside. Weird things like that have happened to me living down here. I've been in the city for almost my whole life, but something never this physical and in broad daylight has ever happened.